Mingəcevir Dövlət Universitetinin Xaricilər Kafedrasının baş müəllimi Əliyev Kərim Səmədoğlu. Biz bu dərsi yaranmış vəziyyətlə əlaqədar olaraq belə vəziyyətdə keçirik və çalışacaq ki, sizə mövzu haqqında qısa yığcam məlumat verək. Middle Ages, orta əsrlər, orta əsrlərin Böyük Britaniyası. Middle Ages is the most turbulent period in British history. It is full of great historical events. The country was always in wars. The constant wars was a great problem in the development of the country. The period after the Norman conquest up until about 1485 is called the Middle Ages, or the medieval period. It was the time of almost constant wars. The English kings fought with the Welsh, Scottish and Irish noblemen for control of their lands. In Wales, the English were able to establish their rule. In 1284, King Edward of England introduced the statue of Rhuddlan was next Wales to the crown of England. Huge castles, including Conwy and Caernarvon, were built to maintain this power. By the middle of the 15th century, the last Welsh rebellions had been defeated. English laws and the English language were introduced. In Scotland, the kings were less successful. In 1314, the Scottish, led by Robert the Bruce, defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and Scotland remained unconquered by the English. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, Ireland was an independent country. The English first went to Ireland as troops to help the Irish king and remained to build their own settlements. By 1200, the English ruled an area of Ireland known as the Pale around Dublin. Some of the important lords in other parts of England accepted the authority of the English king. In Scotland, the English kings were less successful. In 1314, the Scotch, led by Robert the Bruce, defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and Scotland remained unconquered by the English. The English first went to Ireland as troops to help the Irish king and remained to build their own settlements. During the Middle Ages, the English kings also fought a number of wars abroad. Many kings took part in the Crusades, in which European Christians fought for control of the Holy Land. English kings also fought a long war with France, called the 100 Years' War. Even though it actually lasted 116 years, one of the most famous battles of 100 Years' War was the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where King Henry V vastly outnumbered English army defeated the French. The English left France in the 1450s. The Black Death. The Normans used a system of land ownership known as feudalism. So it means that feudalism began a little bit earlier than in other European countries. The people in England had their own lands, which belonged to the feudal lords, and they didn't have the whole rights over those lands. And they were obliged to pay great taxes, which was very hard for them to pay. So sometimes these peasants worked just without anything, without any payment, because the result of their labor belonged to the feuds. 1/3 of the population of England died in the result of Black Death, that was the plague. As we are practicing now coronavirus today, that was really a black death for the whole people. 1/3 of population died in the result of that disease, because there were no such developed scientific technologies to rescue people from that death. There were villages that wholly disappeared, became dead villages. There were no people remained alive. Nobody survived in one village or in one city. That was very hard for the population of Britain. This was one of the most disasters, the hardest disasters ever to strike Britain. Following the Black Death, the smaller population meant there was less need to grow cereal crops. There were labor shortages and peasants began to demand higher wages. New social classes appeared, including owners of large areas of land. After that disease, there were fewer and fewer peasants to work and to produce crops for people. As there were very few people to consume that crop, many peasants did not see any need to work on the field. Most of them moved to the big cities and worked there. In Ireland, the Black Death killed many in the Pale, and for a time the area controlled by the English became smaller. Legal and political changes. In the Middle Ages, Parliament began to develop into the institution it is today. Its origins can be traced of the King's Council of Advisors, which included important noblemen and the leaders of the church. There were few formal limits to the king's power until 12 and 15. In that year, that was the beginning of the 14th century. In the years leading up to 1400, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a series of poems in English about a group of people going to Canterbury on a pilgrimage. Geoffrey Chaucer was such a person in British literature that his contribution to the literature was greater of all, the formation of English literary standards and the formation of English literary language. So when we speak about Geoffrey Chaucer in British literature, we always remember those writers like Qazi Burhanuddin, like Nasimi, like Muhammad Fizuli, who proved that Azerbaijani Turkish is capable to create big novels, big poems. And Geoffrey Chaucer was that man who created the new literary standard, the new literary traditions. His masterpiece, Canterbury Tales, was such an effective literary work that it was followed by hundreds of good literary works, because it inspired the followers of Geoffrey Chaucer to write and to create such big works. It was one of the first books to be printed by William Caxton, the first person in England to print books using printing press. Many of the stories are still popular. Some have been made into plays and television programs. During this period, England was an important trading nation. English wool became a very important export. People came to England from abroad to trade and also to work. Many had special skills, such as weavers from France, engineers from Germany, glass manufacturers from Italy, and canal builders from Holland. These people came to England, they came to Britain to work because there were much more fertile conditions to work and to create. Then the War of Roses. In 1455, a civil war began to decide who should be king of England. It was fought between the supporters of two families, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. This war was called the Wars of Roses because the symbol of Lancaster was a red rose and symbol of York was a white rose. The war ended with the Battle of Bosworth on Bosworth Field in 1485. King Richard III of the House of York was killed in the battle, and Henry Tudor, the leader of the House of Lancaster, became the King Henry VII. King Henry VII has played great role in British history. So in his time, the new legislation system was founded, and there was great facts about his activities. The Tudors and Stuarts, religious conflicts. After his victory in the Wars of Roses, Henry VIII wanted to make sure that England remained peaceful and that his position as king was secure. He deliberately strengthened the central administration of England and reduced the power of nobles. He was thrifty and built up the monarchy financial reserves. To divorce his first wife, Henry VIII needed the approval of the Pope. When Pope refused, Henry established the Church of England. In this new church, the king, not the Pope, would have the power to appoint bishops and order how people should worship. So Henry VIII, when we speak about the King Henry VIII, we always remember his struggle against the Italian church, against the Roman church. So when he wanted to divorce, he was not allowed by Roman church, and he founded new British church, which would appoint the churches to the bishops, episcopes in British church. Henry VIII was succeeded by his son Edward VI, who was strongly Protestant. During his reign, the Book of Common Prayer was written to be used in Church of England. A version of this book is still used in some churches today. Edward died at the age of 15 after ruling for just over 6 years. Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth I was a Protestant. So she belonged to British Church, not Roman Church. She established the Church of England as the official church in England. Everyone had to attend their local church, and there were laws about the type of religious services and the prayer which could be said, but Elizabeth did not ask about people's real beliefs. Enlightenment. Enlightenment is learned in history and also in the lessons of British literature. Enlightenment was a period which covered great time. It was highly seen during the 18th century British literature. The greatest representatives of Enlightenment period was Daniel Defoe and Daniel Defoe, Jonathan Swift, whose masterpieces like Gulliver's Travels and Robinson Crusoe was the great masterpieces of that time. Then comes Industrial Revolution, which was the main bulk of Renaissance period. A new area, Victorian Age. Victorian Age played great role in the history of British government. We shall speak about it in our coming lectures. Sağ olun, dikkatinize göre.